Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss technology and hardware solutions for enterprise. My name is Brandon Sorensen with Rahi. For those who don't know us yet, Rahi is a California-based IT and AV solutions provider with locations across the US and around the world. We provide a full life cycle of design, products, and services to custom fit any technology needs of corporations around the globe. Our goal for today's webinar is to provide you with the information needed to help solve any challenges you might be facing today within your unique environment. Since the start of the pandemic, we get a lot of questions around what technology and hardware can be used to improve the daily experiences of our teams, and how can we make that experience seamless to all users. Ever since every user's needs and environments are unique to what you're trying to accomplish, it's important to bring a solutions provider like Rahi into the conversation early to help identify needs and what technology and hardware will help best solve for these challenges. For today's webinar, we wanted to bring Zoom and Logitech into the conversation, since these two companies have been at the forefront of solving these challenges through their products and hardware and technology, and have placed an emphasis around solutions for enterprise. Their focus and goal during COVID is to engage individuals and companies with a very immersive experience while simplifying the technology for users to make that experience seamless. And before I introduce you to today's panel, I have a couple quick house cleaning notes. There is a Q&A section at the bottom of this webinar. So if you have any questions that come up during the webinar and you want us to dig a little deeper into anything, please lob those questions out there, and we have about 5 minutes at the end to address any questions. Without further ado, let's jump into today's discussion and introduce today's panel. First, from Zoom, we have Nicole Raymer, and from Logitech, we have Gino Zahari. Welcome, team, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Brandon. Really excited to be here with my cohort there, Nicole Raymer. She's great. We've presented a few times together. If I think about Zoom and Logitech, we've been working with Zoom for probably about 7 years now. And a lot of that had to do with helping Zoom kind of progress not only from personal meeting spaces, but also into the world of what we call now Zoom rooms. So it was a pretty exciting experience to watch the evolution of our products kind of in harmony with Zoom's kind of world-class group meeting space environment. If we look at the Zoom wheel, which is basically a way that Zoom categorizes all of their services and all of their capabilities, we like to do what we call rewrap the wheel, right? So I think we've all been at home now using our webcams and our headsets and our keyboards and our mice. Those are user tools. And those user tools now are starting to morph back into when we go back to the office, what are we going to do, right? How are we going to deploy Zoom rooms in these meeting spaces, and what equipment do I need beyond, the camera, mouse, headset, webcam environment? And so that's where our growth has really been exponential over the last few years, is developing these collaborative experiences in concert with Zoom in these basically meeting spaces, what we would call Zoom rooms. So with that, Nicole, I'll hand it to you.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks for the introduction. I know that I'm really excited to be on the call this morning and to see so many people on and ready to talk about rooms, because it means that there's a light at the end of the tunnel finally, and returning to work in at least some capacity is definitely upon us in the near future, which is great because I, for one, cannot wait to see customers and colleagues again in person. So while rooms are going to look a little bit different going back to the office post-COVID, the good news is that Zoom and Logitech solutions will scale to fit your needs and will really support any room type, right? So from your small to medium-sized spaces, all the way up to your larger divisible spaces, or even things like your green room or broadcast studios can all be covered by both Zoom and Logitech. Now, one thing you can count on for sure, however, is that our UI is going to remain the same across the board, right? So simple and easy to use regardless of room type or hardware choice. Our mission is to provide an easy button when it comes to spaces, much like we've done during this pandemic, and the easy button when it comes to your virtual meetings that you've been running remotely. We want to remove unnecessary complexity from these spaces so there's less points of failure. But more importantly, these rooms are easier to manage on the back end for administrators that aren't always going to be in the office going forward.
And Nicole, you said it, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And And we're seeing that from our side here at Rahi, because we're getting into a lot of those conversations about return to office, refreshing our technology. A lot of those projects that were maybe placed on hold over the past year are now getting some legs now that people have an idea of what that return to office is starting to look like for them, right? One of the biggest questions that we get in those conversations is, as we do return to office, how can I reduce the amount of support needed as far as headcount goes to support this technology that I'm putting into my space? And Gino, can you speak to a little bit about how Logitech is solving for that?
Yeah. Logitech has a service called Logitech Sync. It's actually an agent that would live on a PC or a Mac that talks to our peripherals. And so with that comes a cloud account that's free, basically, and allows me to look at my entire estate. Because when we think about deploying these rooms, if you will, it's not just 1 or 10, it's thousands, especially at the enterprise. And I know there's a lot of enterprise tools out there for management of operating systems that are on computes or even existing AV equipment. But Logitech Sync is a wonderful tool because we're looking at the USB peripherals that are attached to those PCs and those Macs that are actually running the Zoom Room software. In concert, we work the Sync product in basically in connection with ZDM or Zoom Device Management. So both tools give you unique experiences or unique insights into your environment. If you think about Zoom Device Management, it's a way to manage users, right, in my Zoom account, but also now the estate or the rooms, where Logitech Sync is really a bit more targeted towards the peripherals that are attached to everyday compute sources, if you will. All right, so I'll let Nicole maybe elaborate a little bit more on ZDM, but it is one pane of glass to manage your entire environment from Zoom's lens. It's very key to our environment.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. In terms of scale, right, Brandon and Gino, I heard you both mention it, and it's a really important point because Logitech has a lot of really great plug and play options when it comes to the hardware, like the Rally Bar, for instance, which makes deploying these devices in volume very simple with very little installation costs, if any at all. Now, in conjunction with ZDM, the device management tool that you're given through Zoom, you can manage everything from a Zoom platform perspective. This means your meeting licenses, your webinar licenses, to phone and chat, all the way down to each of your physical meeting spaces can all be managed from this single pane of glass. This makes managing things like updates or scheduling and digital signage deployed throughout your enterprise very simple, regardless of where you've chosen to work for that day.
And it's one thing for us to say it's simple to deploy, it's easy, and all that, especially if we're talking about someone on a global scale, right? But it's really good to hear from end users who have gone through that experience and can kind of report back to us. For that, we have a case study that was done with F5, and I think it really speaks to a lot of that. Simon, can we roll that case study?
Video has become an embedded part of who we are at F5. Logitech's really enabled us to scale globally. We do Zoom Room implementations all around the planet.
We were more or less forced to work remotely, and then there was a shift, and now it's pretty much normal to work remotely by default.
We know we're not going to be going back to the same office we left, and video is really the way that F5 is staying connected internally.
Having Logitech as a partner with us in helping us adapt a video-first culture is huge.
La alianza entre Logitech y Zoom es muy fuerte. Los productos se desarrollan constantemente en conjunto, uno para el otro.
I've set up almost 100 rooms in the last couple of years, and every single one of them is a Zoom room. We use Logitech meetups for the smaller ones and rallies for the larger meeting rooms. It's how it should be. You unpack everything, you connect it, and then it just works.
With Zoom and Logitech, you can really come up with different use cases to suit your needs and scale accordingly, from the small meeting room right through to a large auditorium.
No veo forma más sencilla de hacer una videoconferencia que no sea con una Logitech Tab y Zoom Rooms. Esa integración entre Zoom Rooms y la Logitech Tab es fantástica.
If you're looking for something that's easy to use and cost effective with scalability and availability worldwide, Logitech and Zoom together are a huge, huge home run.
What a great case study. And actually you see it in that case study, right? You see a lot of people in conference rooms, you see them working remotely, you see a lot of different scenarios that are kind of coming into play, especially over this past year. Oftentimes we get questions on, how do we create a better experience for participants that are physically in that meeting room versus the people who are outside of the meeting room? Nicole, can you speak a little bit how Zoom helps solve for that?
Yeah, this is a really important discussion topic. And I've got to say, I'm having this discussion with our customers multiple times a day. What they're saying to us is that they really don't want to return to the office to an outdated view of the meeting room. And what I mean by that is, in returning back to the office and into these enclosed spaces, you're going to see people, more spread out in these meeting rooms, right, for social distancing reasons. And so with that, it's going to be harder to see people that are maybe sitting further back in the room. It may even be harder to hear those individuals as well. And because we've all been accustomed over the last year or so during the pandemic to having that equal screen real estate space, we've really put a big emphasis on, what are these spaces going to look like returning to the office, and how can we give people a better hybrid meeting experience? So with Smart Gallery, which we're releasing in June on Android devices to start with, this is going to be a great way to give everyone that equity in a meeting, whether they're at home or in a conference room. So with Smart Gallery, everyone has equal screen real estate space. No one feels left out of the conversation, again, because they're sitting too far back in the meeting room and aren't being picked up as well on camera as those sitting closer. And also it's going to make those folks that are, at home, but aren't in a room, not feel as disconnected, right? Or left out of the conversation because they aren't there in that physical meeting space. So again, our goal is to make everyone feel as though they're an equal participant with this Smart Gallery feature.
And Gino, does Logitech have anything that they're working on with that?
Absolutely, Brendan. Yeah, I know we're working with Zoom on Smart Gallery, right? Excited for that June timeline, if you will, to create more of an enhanced experience, right? When we do go back, right? Seeing folks that are in those conference rooms, how do I give them equal real estate, if you will? At Logitech, we've had RightSight in play now for quite some time. And RightSight's a technology that will auto frame individuals that are in a group space. So we're looking for, heads and torsos, and actually framing them so that we get rid of that dead space, right? Not everyone always picks up the remote control or brings up the Zoom controller and zooms in on themselves because they're not so concerned about it. Let's automatically make that happen through AI. So that was the first step, with basically providing kind of intelligent cameras in the spaces so that Zoom can take that real estate, if you will, squish it down so that everyone is seen equally on the other end. There is another step to kind of Smart Gallery, if you will, and that is, Brandon, while you're talking to Nicole in the same space, you'll be having a dialogue happening naturally with one another while I'm at the other end watching you two communicate in your own little boxes, if you will. If I can see that organically, so I can see that both of you have your reaction to her questions or her statements, that's very, very valuable for the context and how we communicate. So we're working with Zoom on how do we combine kind of the best of all worlds, right? With auto framing, with gallery type viewing, so that we all have a better experience. With RightSight comes the technology of being able to count the people as well. I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but how do we actually look at how the spaces are being leveraged, right? If a room is set up for 12 people and only 5 people are joining that room because they want more distance, more space, how do we tell facilities, right? Or tell the IT professional that that space isn't being leveraged in the way you had thought when you first designed it? So what can we do now to actually, either divide the space up or just give, facilities some feedback on how space is really being leveraged? And a lot of that's through what we call people counting, or being able to associate a number of moving parts or moving people in that space, no matter if their back is turned to the camera or if they're sitting front and center. So,
and it's that out of the box thinking by both companies that, really endears companies like us, Rahi, to Zoom and Logitech. You guys are always pushing the boundaries. You're always taking what isn't normal and making that normal. And and features that people used to have, their companies had to pay tens of thousands of dollars for, and were very complex on the back end, are now very simple, intuitive, and they come at they come as part of packages, right? So it's been fun to watch this all evolve over the last few years. Another aspect of the return to work and the safe workplace environment is around touchless devices. Gino, is Logitech doing anything with touchless interface and the likes?
Yeah, so we, because we make devices and things that you would touch to control meetings, one of the first steps to enable basically users from a voice standpoint was our integration with Alexa for Business in concert with Zoom. So we've had this for about 1.5 years now. I'd say before COVID, it wasn't a big deal. It was like, that's kind of nice. I can tell Alexa to start my meeting, and she'll start my meeting when I'm in a conference space. But things that are important are like, well, tell me what the Wi-Fi password is in this guest room, or where is my next open conference room, right? So there are other things that Alexa can communicate with Zoom to tell Zoom what to do without actually touching a device. That was very, very key for us. So we'll see probably a better uptick of using voice and trusting voice inside meeting rooms to really just speed up the process, right? Get our meetings going and respecting the fact that I don't want to touch a device if during this kind of COVID time. A lot of this technology, though, at least with Zoom, has to do with a great feature they have called ultrasonic pairing or direct sharing. It's a feature where the tap controller, our controller device, emits a tone that the Zoom meeting or the desktop client can hear. What that does is creates this magical association where when I walk into a Zoom room space, my device knows that I'm in a room and it can tell me, do you want to connect with this room to do things like share content, right? Or start a meeting call. And so it's really set the table for allowing me as myself on my mobile device or on my laptop to take control over that Zoom room. And that's a great feature that Zoom just rolled out, but they're leveraging this kind of ultrasonic connection between the two devices. So very excited about that.
Yeah, and in addition to being able to control the meeting via voice or things like wireless sharing, there's also quite a bit that we're doing to make these spaces touchless. So without needing to touch a communal control panel in the room, you'll have the ability to control your meeting room experience from an edge device that you're most comfortable with, right? So from a smartphone, a laptop, Mac, or PC, you'll be able to do things like start your meeting, share your content, or share your annotations, right? So if you want to annotate from your edge device, as opposed to getting up and maybe touching an annotation board or a smart board of any kind, you'll be able to do it from the comfort of your seat and using your own device. The experience in room will be equal to what you have come to love and know about the Zoom meeting experience remotely over the past year. And that's really our goal, right? Whether you're at home or you're in the meeting room itself, you should have parity when it comes to feature functionality across the board. And so we're delivering all of that feature functionality to you that you've been used to now in the room.
It's very, very immersive. And you mentioned rooms, and that's a good segue. We're seeing the conference room evolve, right? And the typical conference room is certainly changing. Gino, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as that change and what Logitech's doing to help with that?
Yeah, you bet. I think pre-pandemic, we were the huddle. We call it the huddle room rage was happening, right? We were in open floor plans and trying to think where can we create kind of private spaces or areas in which Brendan, you and I can collaborate and then possibly get on a call or share content in that conference room. So we've seen the small room kind of morph into this kind of medium-sized space, right? And we don't like to put boundaries around space, but things that we need to think about are how do we mic up these spaces now? If really there's going to be 3 of us, right, that are social distancing in a room that maybe would normally hold 6 to 8 people, how can I make sure I can hear what you're saying? How can I make sure the camera can see you now that you're spread apart? Things like gallery view are going to help us with that. But rooms have grown just because we need a little bit more space to operate. But there's also another side of that is what technology actually goes into those meeting rooms. And it's not always just more cameras or more devices that can make our lives, a little bit more complex. It's what feeds into that experience. What you're seeing on the screen right now is two really similar looking Zoom rooms. One is Zoom rooms using a passive display with a touch controller that's driving the experience. And then the one on the right is a Zoom room for touch experience. Where I can go up and actually touch the whiteboard, right? Or again, use my mobile device to drive that experience. But in that case, I want to leverage the whiteboard feature of Zoom Rooms. I want to be able to annotate and draw and collaborate with my coworkers or those that are afar. And just putting the right technology in the right space, not just putting a camera in a space, but understanding what it's used for is really important these days.
Yeah, and outside of the spaces too, Gino, to that point, if we go just outside the conference room itself, we're hearing a lot of people ask for better ways to manage things like open working spaces, which have been referred to as, hot desking or hoteling areas. So facilities can better plan and manage for that day's expected capacity, right? Since we're not necessarily sure, who's going to be in the office on a day-to-day basis, since we're going to leave it up to our employees or maybe schedule them and sort of stagger them in ways that makes sure or ensures that we're always within the appropriate or proper capacity limits. So these spaces through Zoom scheduling ability, you're going to be able to reserve these spaces even before entering the office building and provide that data, provide those analytics to facilities groups on the back end. So again, they can properly manage and keep these spaces safe. Now, I don't think our customers realize that with a single Zoom room license, you get unlimited scheduling and digital signage, which means you can deploy as many scheduling panels as you would like and reserve your rooms as a resource the same way you do today through Outlook or Exchange or Google, for instance. Additionally, you're also going to be able to deploy digital signage to as many monitors throughout the office buildings as you would like, eliminating the need for costly third-party software solutions that have typically driven these different components. Now, digital signage is a great way to push things out like emergency alerts or broadcasts, for instance. It's also a great way to display things like wayfinding information, so your employees have better visibility on where their meeting space is, or perhaps where open meeting spaces are, so they can reserve those in an ad hoc nature. Additionally, with digital signage, you can easily collaborate around any monitor simply by sharing your screen without the need for any additional AV equipment. So you could just simply wirelessly share your content to any screen in an open space and create more of an ad hoc meeting environment. Now, lastly, we're going to start to collect a lot more data around the rooms and these spaces, so you can see how many people are in a meeting room, for example, and perhaps what the CO2 or temperature levels are in that particular space. Now, this is a great way, so you can start setting things like capacity limits for your rooms. Again, keeping people safe upon re-entry to the office.
And Nicole, I'm glad you expanded a little bit about what Zoom can do outside of the conference room, right? When we're in conversations with a lot of clients and end users, most of them don't realize all the other features that come along with Zoom and the fact that they can start to reduce some of their other subscriptions that they're paying for today because it's going to be bundled within Zoom. So it's a huge value add and not one that I'm sure everyone's aware of, right? So we're coming up to the 5-minute mark. We have a few minutes earmarked here at the end for some questions. Simon, any questions from the gallery?
Sure. Can ZDM provide firmware updates for USB peripherals connected to Mac or PC platforms?
That's probably a good one for me. Yeah. So ZDM cannot do that. That's where the software such as Logitech Sync would handle that firmware delivery of Logitech firmware to its device through that device, through that compute source. So ZDM is going to look after the operating system of Windows or Mac, but not the peripherals associated with it. When you start moving into appliances, now both the firmware, the OS, right, everything is included because we're running the Zoom native client, like for example on the Rally Bar family that Logitech just announced, right? That operating system is Android and it's running ZDM or running the Zoom Room software, and it's able to now push the firmware updates directly to itself because it's a device, but not a peripheral. So hopefully that made sense to the person that asked that question. But yeah.
All right, the next question. I have offices in multiple other regions. How can I get support in deploying Zoom rooms outside of the US?
Oh, that's definitely down my wheelhouse. You know, at Rahi, we're a global company, right? So we get into these conversations pretty frequently about companies, whether they're based here in the US or internationally and trying to go, across the pond. There's a lot of aspects that one needs to look at, right? And really it's a conversation to figure out what's going to work best for your ecosystem, right? In your scenario. I think it's important when looking at global deployments to figure out things like, where's your procurement going to happen? Do you need local procurement? Do you need your product shipped? Do you need in-country billing, or do you need US dollars billing, right? Do you need your rooms kitted before they're deployed, right? And do you need it brought in-house and assembled, and then we just roll it out? So it's essentially rolled out like an IKEA sort of set. There's a lot of different ways to approach the rollout, and really at the end of the day, it's what's going to work best for you. A company like us, we can be extremely flexible in how we approach that, and really we want to get down to the nuts and bolts of how do we take the pain of a global deployment off your plate, put it onto our plate, and let us manage and run with it, so you don't have to worry about it, and you can reduce the amount of time it takes to make that global deployment happen.
All right, and the last question. It is really important for my users to have whiteboarding capabilities in conference rooms. How can Zoom support this need?
Oh, that's a really great question. We're being asked a lot about this, especially in the hybrid work environment that we're all going to be entering if soon, if not already. So annotations can happen at any touch display in the room, right? So that's something that you're used to today. With Zoom, you can also use your client controls to annotate from the edge devices I had mentioned earlier. But I think one thing that you can look forward to from Zoom in the very near future is this idea around infinite or persistent whiteboards or canvases, right? Where you enter a meeting room or virtually, right? You can enter that same meeting room and have all of your annotations stored there. So when you re-enter that meeting, maybe in a following week or following month, all of your annotations are going to pull up, or all of your sticky notes are going to pull up from your Scrum session, for instance, just the way that you had left them before. We're even going to start to templatize these infinite workspaces based on typical or reoccurring meeting topics, making it easier for you to choose the layout that works best for you.
Awesome. It looks like that was the last question. So that's perfect. And thank you, panel, for joining us today. It's always nice to have experts on hand to join us and talk through this technology. I know it's been evolving a lot over the past year, and it's exciting to see the new features and approaches that are being taken to solve for a lot of these new challenges that we're facing today, right? For those of you on the call today, Ali Vidali will be reaching out to you to see if you have any follow-up questions or want to learn more information. Today we talked a lot about how, excuse me, how Logitech and Zoom can simplify the experience for end users. If you have any needs for these solutions within your space, or you just want to learn how to optimize your current space, reach out to us here at Rahi. We have the experience in rolling out Logitech and Zoom in a variety of environments, both big and small. Bring us to your next project and allow us the opportunity to deliver a better experience to your users. Thank you again for taking part in our discussion today, and be well.